Glad to have you before the committee. I wanted to turn to TRIO. I wanted to echo Senator Collins' support, but I know you wanted accountability, and you think it would be a good idea to have each grantee have to have benchmarks that they're seeking to address?
I think that we do need to have better accountability with TRIO, but one of the things that I
So
said
having
certainly-
limited time, but benchmarks up front would be useful to have these programs meet?
Yes, I
Maybe
think they
have them
would.
do an annual report on meeting those benchmarks?
Accountability, yes, because we don't now
Great.
have the ability to track that.
So actually, those benchmarks are set now, and each grantee has to do an annual report. Have you read those annual reports?
I've not read them all, no.
Okay,
But I
because
do,
I also
know
wanted
that
to-
they're not following all
Well,
those different laws.
so-
And I've also said that if Congress...
Madam, just let me finish if I can. And that is that you said there was no accountability. I just pointed out that two of the things you'd like to see, which are benchmarks and annual performance reports, are already done. In addition, the Pell Institute published a recent summary of 4 of the studies the Department of Education did on 4 of these 8 TRIO programs. Have you looked at those reports? Because they did a thorough evaluation of these programs.
I have not personally, no.
Well, that bothers me, for you to come before us today and say there needs to be accountability, and yet there is accountability, and it just seems like a cover story for saying we don't want to help blue-collar kids make it into college. And I must tell you, most of my colleagues here, they're not blue-collar kids. I am. I know how hard it was to make that leap into college. I know the difficulty of the culture when you grow up in high school and you never talk to anybody about going to college, and you don't understand what that's all about in that world. And these TRIO programs have resulted in 6 million students graduating through those programs. And you want accountability? Well, what did those studies say that have been done by the Department of Education? They said upward bound students twice as likely to earn a bachelor's degree. Talent search students 33% more likely to enroll in college. Veterans upward bound, 42% more likely. I'm going to go on to my next question, but let me just say, your argument that there's no studies, no accountability, is just actually wrong. And the fact that you're coming here not even having looked at your own department studies of these programs in order to be informed about them is profoundly troubling. Let me turn to the cost of higher education. This is also very important to a blue-collar kid. Folks in my community today, because I still live in a blue-collar community, they say, we're not sure our kids should go to college because they'll end up with a millstone of mountain of debt and maybe no job. And here you are making it more expensive. I wonder if you know how much a student in Germany has to pay in tuition for university.
I don't.
It's 0. What about the broader European economic zone?
Sir, we don't live in Europe. We
It
live here
is
in the
0.
United
But my
States.
point here is those countries are saying we want every child to thrive. We want every child to have opportunity. We don't want them to be saying our kids, maybe we should tell them not to go to college because they'll have this mountain of debt. And that opportunity, that's American values of opportunity for every individual. And here you are raising the cost of college, making it much harder for ordinary kids from blue-collar backgrounds to be able to pursue their dreams. And I find that totally inconsistent with Trump's campaign, where he said he would fight for ordinary families.
No, I have to disagree, sir. We're not raising the cost of college. We are actually, with all of the programs that we want to put in place, we want colleges to reduce their cost.
Well, actually, these loan programs that you're changing are making it much more expensive for kids to go to college, and they're getting
We've
the
not
message.
changed loan programs.
I'm going to turn to mental health because I'm very concerned about mental health. A few years ago, before COVID, when I was in a meeting with student counselors in Eastern Oregon, a very rural area, and they said, you know, we're seeing kids come in our early ages, and they're acting out much more than they ever did before. And I said, well, is this because was there a factory that just shut down here, or a mill that just shut down, or an infusion of wave of meth? And they said, no, those are all, the economy's a factor, drug use is a factor in our community. But no, those aren't new. And one of the counselors said, this is what's new. And they pulled out their cell phone. This is what's new. Kids are coming in with far less understanding and ability of how to sit in a collaborative environment like a classroom and how to communicate with other children and teachers. There is a book that just came out. My staff happened to put it on my desk this morning, so I'm going to ask for Chapter 5 to be put into the record, The Anxious Generation. And I was paging through it, and under Chapter 5, it notes that there are 4 factors in which these cell phones are affecting our children profoundly: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and screen addiction. I'd really encourage you to take a look at this. I've been urging the department to seriously look at the issue of how childhood is changing. And childhood is changing because of technology in ways that are really compromising the ability of our education enterprise to work well. But this brings to my point about why you have canceled mental health grants for our schools. We have 5 schools in Oregon that got grants to have more mental health counselors, and you have canceled them. Why have you canceled mental health grants in the middle of an enormously challenging time for our students?
We've not canceled mental health grants. We've said we're not continuing them after this year because we're going to allow those programs to be rebid and to take a different look at them, but they have not been canceled. And I couldn't agree with you more about cell phones. There's governors of several states who have said bell to bell there are not going to be cell phones in the classroom, and they are seeing upticks in their literacy and also in the social interaction. So therefore, states have the abilities at very different levels to go ahead and make decisions and to put their policies in place that can be effective.
Then the 5 grants that you have canceled that you are unaware of in Oregon, you will restore those 5 grants?
We've not canceled. We're not continuing those grants.
So if you discover that you have actually canceled grants that were already awarded, you will undo those cancellations?
I would like to get back to you on that. I do not believe we've canceled any grants. We're not continuing, but we will rebid them.
Well, you'll rebid them, meaning you're canceling them, but you'll rebid them.
We are not continuing them. We haven't canceled them.
Okay, well,
They are continuing.
Well, I've got 5 schools that have received letters from you or your department saying their grants, their mental health grants have been canceled. They worked very hard to apply for those
Canceled
grants.
or not continued.
That they've been canceled, the grants that they have received for their programs.
And I will look into that and get back to you.
Obviously, when you get a grant, it's for work you're doing from here forward. So if not continuing means as of today we're not funding it, then you canceled the grant.
No, you can rebid the grant, you can recompete the grant, and you can have different
Is that what you're doing?
aspects of it.
You said the grants you got, we're ending them and we're taking them back, but we're going to
I said we
recompete them?
are not continuing them after this year. We will have a rebidding process to relook at those grants.
Well, I
do it
strongly
responsibly.
encourage you to understand how the changes you're making are hurting ordinary kids across this country who may have aspirations, and those aspirations may not all require going to college, but many of those aspirations can be well served by higher education, and you shouldn't be putting obstacles in their path.
Thank you.
Senator Merkley, if you look, what we're doing has not worked.
All right.
So we're continuing to throw money at things that are not being successful. So we are trying to look appropriately at all of our grants and how the Department of Education is operating.
Madam Chair, I'll just say those programs have been successful. If you'd taken the very effort to read the evaluations of the TRIO programs, you wouldn't be here making that argument today.
All right. Let's questions.
Thank you very much, Chair Capito. Good morning, Secretary McMahon. You know, President Trump has made clear that he wants to abolish the very department that you lead, and we know here that you cannot eliminate the Department of Education without an act of Congress. But I'm afraid that that has not stopped you from preventing the department from actually doing its job. You have indiscriminately shuttered offices and pushed out half of the department's staff, and under your leadership, we have seen critical research to improve student outcomes axed overnight, and funding for mental health services and teacher training, among a whole lot, abruptly cut off and discontinued. Now, today you come before this committee to request massive funding cuts that do, in my opinion, nothing to help improve opportunities for students in our public schools throughout the country. You are proposing to slash Pell Grants and much more. Now, you and the President say this isn't about cutting education funding, but all about, quote, returning education to the states. But actually, that can be further from the truth, because the reality is this administration is actually taking unprecedented steps to extort schools and universities and hold federal funding hostage if they don't conform with your agenda. So it's pretty clear that returning education to the states actually means letting states and colleges and local communities pick up the tab. And I just don't believe that's how things should work in America. I don't believe that's good for students, and I don't believe it's good for our families. Now, having said that, Secretary McMahon, as I mentioned, you have set out to eliminate nearly half of your department's workforce, and that includes pushing out the door more than half of the staff at the Office for Civil Rights. The entire staff responsible for managing grant operations and contract procurement, and employees who actually prevent students from getting ripped off by predatory colleges. The department cannot do its basic job to execute the law, given how many staff have been pushed out, and it is our students and our teachers who will suffer the consequences. So I want to know from you, before you cut that much staff, did you conduct any analysis to assess whether or not it would degrade support and services for students in our schools, or how the department would still be able to execute the law after losing so many employees?
Certainly. Excuse me, good morning. Thank you for that. Yes, we did talk to the department itself.
But did you do an actual analysis?
OCR. What we looked at across was how can we restructure the department so that we can maximize the use of the people who are there. So what we did was in like training manuals and things of that nature to look at it and say, okay, we can better operate if we focus on
So this was a
specifically.
conversation. You didn't do an actual analysis to determine what the effects of this would be?
No.
So no study was done. They were just fired, and you assumed that it would work?
No, obviously not. I have been in the private sector and done restructuring before in companies, and it's painful to do
It
restructuring.
is painful, but normally companies look ahead and say, what are our goals and what will be the impact if these employees are gone from this department? That's why I asked, but you've not done an analysis, and my time is short, so let me continue. I know Ranking Member Baldwin talked with you about this as well. You were required by law to submit an operating plan 45 days after enactment of the full year CR, detailing exactly how you are spending funding Congress provided this year. You didn't do that. The purported operating plan that you did submit told us virtually nothing about how you are spending taxpayer dollars right now at this very moment. And that really raises concerns about when and actually if you're going to get funding that Congress did provide for FY25 out the door. For example, your FY26 budget request zeroes out dedicated funding for literacy education programs, and your operating plan for this year describes this funding as unallocated. So will you allocate the $220 million for literacy programs that Congress appropriated for FY25?
Well, Senator, as I mentioned earlier, we are looking at the unallocated dollars now to determine which of those programs we can best spend those dollars on. And I'll be happy to get back to you. And we want to work with Congress on those unallocated dollars to see where they could be spent the best.
Well, what is your plan to make sure that that funding actually gets to the schools and students it was intended to support? We're running out of time here.
Well, to look at those programs and then to allocate them to the states if those programs we believe is the best interest.
Those funds
of
were
students.
appropriated by Congress. Your department was to allocate them, and it really looks to me like the department is illegally impounding funding that would help our students succeed with plans that don't exist and just day after day going by here, and that's our concern.
Well, let us work more with you as we update those allocations, as we did before.
When do you plan to have those funds out by?
Well, the funds that we are approving will go out in this year.
Like in this next month, or
In the fiscal year.
You're running out of time, so we need to see what the plan is. If you could provide.
Yes.
That. Okay. Secretary McMahon, the administration says that one of its priorities is tackling anti-Semitism in our schools. That's correct, right?
Correct.
Well, the Office of Civil Rights at your department takes the leading role in preventing anti-Semitism and enforcing our nation's civil rights law. It is really an important mission. But as you hopefully know, that office is underwater. What is the current backlog at OCR? Can you tell us that?
Well, we inherited about a 20,000 backload from the Biden administration. But one of the things that we found is some of those cases were like one-page complaints, and we've really been able to get rid of many of them. And we are fulfilling.
So what is the current?
This is important for me to finish. We absolutely are fulfilling all of our statutory requirements, have not failed to do any of those. And not only are we reducing the backload, but we are keeping up with what's coming in now with a reduced staff.
I appreciate
because we're doing it efficiently.
If you don't have the staff, you can't do them. So
No, excuse me. if you have an efficient staff that has changed programs and you are addressing
well,
all
my
of the
question
issues,
is, what is
then
the-
you are
can
being
you tell us
successful.
what the
So I'm
current-
answering your question
Yeah.
by
No,
completely answering it.
Madam Secretary, my question is, what is the current backlog?
Current backlog is probably about, let's see, I'm looking at my numbers now, about 2,500 cases.
2,500, and how many are you processing per month? Do you have any sense?
No, well, we're catching up with the backlog and keeping current on the ones that are coming in.
But you don't know how many you're processing every month? You can't tell us, so we can get an
I
idea.
can get back to you with that.
Would
with
you?
an exact number? Sure.
If you could commit to giving us quarterly reports so we know whether OCR is simply dismissing these cases or doing its job. If you could give us a quarterly.
I'd be happy to do that. I can assure you it's doing its job.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. And I applaud you for your courage to make changes and the efficiency that is so needed that you're addressing that. You know, we've talked a lot about Pell Grants for short-term